Hi guys, in this tutorial I'll be showing you how to assemble this Magnolia Fairy. This fairy is the 5th fairy in my Tabletop Fairies collection. Here is a look at my other 4 fairies. One thing I added to this Magnolia Fairy that the others don't have is a flower crown. Just a fun little addition I've been wanting to add to a fairy design, and I thought this Magnolia Fairy was perfect for it. Like my other fairies, this one also has trailing vines coming out of her wings. I gave these vines the large, bold leaves that are characteristic of magnolia trees. Before I show you how to assemble this fairy, let's go over what you'll see in your downloaded folder. Something new here, this design is the first design for which I'm offering 2 versions. And by versions, I'm talking specifically about fold lines for the fairy. And before I confuse you even more, let's go right into the folder. When you open your main folder, you'll see 2 more folders. One labeled Cut and one labeled Design. Now this is not new. For my table fairies, I offer this design version, which is just a flat art of the complete fairy that you can use in prints if you wanted to. And of course, this can be found in the design folder. To actually make this fairy, you will go into the Cut folder. And here you'll see the fairy is split up into 2 more folders. One is where you'll find her body and wings, and in the second folder you'll find the leaves and flowers for the crown. Now in the body and wings folder is where you'll find the 2 versions of the fairy that I mentioned earlier. And this is specifically for Cricut users. Remember I said this has to do with fold lines. In this folder you'll find 2 more folders, one labeled Yes Scoring Tool and the second labeled No Scoring Tool. If you've purchased any of my designs before and they've been working fine for you, you can find the same type of design in the Yes Scoring Tool folder. For Cricut users, which file you need will depend on the obvious, whether you have a scoring tool for your machine. I'm not going to go into detail here about how to use the files with and without a scoring tool. I've made a separate video for this with detailed directions, and I'll link that below. And obviously, if you have a scoring tool, you would use the Yes Scoring Tool folder, and if you do not have a scoring tool, you will use the No Scoring Tool folder. The difference between the 2 versions is in the fold lines of the fairy, as I said. If you have a scoring tool, your fold lines will come out like this one. And if you do not have a scoring tool, your blade will cut dashed lines like this one for your fold lines. And on the topic of versions, this fairy actually does come in 2 design versions not related to fold lines. In the body and wings file, you'll notice that you can make a fairy with wings that are attached to the body, like this one, or you can make a fairy with this set here, which have the wings detached from the body. And this is for the case where you want to create a fairy with wings that are a different color from her body. This piece here is the wing backing piece, and it will be used for both versions of the fairy. And notice for both this wing backing piece and the wing piece up here, I've doubled them because you need 2 of each to make one fairy, but I've also situated them so they are mirror images of each other. And this is how you need to cut them if you are using single-sided paper like glitter paper. And one last thing is these fairy bodies may look similar, but they aren't just doubled like the wing pieces. The fairy's legs are actually slightly staggered from each other on each piece, so you want to make sure you cut the 2 different fairy bodies. Here is a quick look at what you'll find in the Leaves and Flower Crown folder. You should see 3 separate leaves, 2 leaf vines, and then these little pieces here are the flowers and the leaves that make up the crown. And this is just 1 flower and 1 leaf design that I've just multiplied. You can cut as many or as few as you need. Okay, now let's move on to assembling this fairy. Here are the materials you'll need. The X-Acto knife is optional. Any sharp object will work in its place. And similar to my other projects, I'll be using double-sided tape that has lining on it, and I'll provide a link below. And for glue, I'm using tacky white glue, which dries quicker than regular white glue. And I'm also including a tweezer here because it helps to have one to pick up the tiny pieces for the flower crown. And here are the cutouts I'll be using in this tutorial. And now we are ready to assemble. First, let me quickly go over how we'll be assembling this fairy. Here is the fairy with the wings attached, and we will be attaching the two fairies like this. And these wing fill-in pieces will sit behind the magnolia flower like this. Notice the fairy's legs here are staggered when you put the two fairies together. Here is the fairy with the separated wings. I cut these magnolias in glitter paper, which is one-sided. And if you use one-sided paper like this, make sure you cut them out in mirror images of each other. And same goes for the fairy's body. And here is how the wing will attach to the fairy's body. If you fold the magnolia wing at the fold line, it will fit snugly right up against the fairy's back. And just make sure that this petal here, which looks like a little tongue, is down near the fairy's skirt. You could flip it like this with the tongue-like petal up near the head, but then it gets a little too close to the fairy's head and we don't want any chance of it overlapping with the fairy. So if you do decide to flip the wing and attach it like this, just make sure no part of it is overlapping the fairy. Okay, on to assembling. So once you have your parts cut, lay them out facing each other like this. And the first thing is to fold your magnolia wings into a valley fold like this. So the valley of the fold is facing you. And just double check to make sure that tongue-like petal is towards the bottom. To attach the wing to the fairy's body, we are going to be using this panel here. For glitter paper, because it's not a smooth surface, I'm going to use white glue. If you are using regular cardstock paper, a piece of double-sided tape here will work fine. So cover that band in glue and then slip it behind the fairy, aligning that fold line to the fairy's back. And then just repeat with the second fairy. And now you have fairies with wings attached, which are exactly like these cutouts, which I will work with for the rest of the video just so I'm not jumping back and forth. Here are the cutouts with the attached wings, and if you look again at the fairy with the glitter wing, it already has the fold made at the wing because we did that on the detached magnolia. So with these fairies, the first thing you do is lay them out face to face like this, and then fold the wings upwards. Again, this is called a valley fold. Then flip them both over like this because we will be attaching the wing backings. I'm just using cardstock paper, so I'm going to attach my backings with double-sided tape. This double-sided tape now comes in different widths. They range from 1/4 inch to 3/4 inch wide. I'm going to use the 1/4 inch wide tape and just cut a piece off and attach it to the base of the magnolia. Then remove the liner and attach your wing backing. Line up the bottom of the backing to the wing fold line and try to center it in that space. And if you center it, you should have a nice border around it. Now repeat the same steps with the second fairy. Once you have the backings attached, we will be working with just one fairy so you can set the second fairy aside. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to do this next step with this fairy. If you're left-handed, it may be easier to do this next part with the other fairy. The first step is to attach some tape underneath the wing fold. This tape will hold our leaf vines. The length of tape you need measures to about 1.5 inches, so cut your tape to approximately this length. It does not need to be exact. My 3/4 inch wide tape is a little too wide, so I'm cutting a little bit off of it. And then just place your tape right along that fold line without overlapping it. Then remove the lining to expose the sticky surface. And now we are going to attach all the leafy goodness. So there are 2 vines for this fairy. One is a little longer than the other. It doesn't matter which one you place first here. One vine will sit on one side of the fairy and the other will sit on the other side, and that can be decided later. The only thing you need to watch for here is that none of the vines overlap the fairy's body. So just place the vines on top of the tape, and the curve of the vines should kind of follow the fairy's skirt here. Next, we are going to place the 3 singular leaves. One of the leaves has a bit of a curve on it, so I'm placing this one towards the top. And again, make sure it's not sitting over the fairy's head. Then place the second leaf. And then the third. Here, I'm just going to shimmy one of the leaves to the other side of the vines, just so when I open them up, they're more spread out. Okay, next we are going to place a second piece of tape on top of those leaf ends. Again, place the tape along the fold line without going over it. And at this point, pick your fairy up and fold the skirt and the legs away from you. Earlier, we made valley folds with the wings. These folds are called mountain folds. And I'm doing this just so I can better see the area of the fairy that needs to be glued or taped. Since it's a small area, I'm just going to use tape for the rest of the fairy. And now just cover the rest of the fairy with some double-sided tape. Place a piece close to the skirt fold line and then just cover the other areas. I'm going to place another small piece along the leg fold line here, and that looks like a pretty good distribution. So now take your second fairy and align it on top. Try to get a perfect or near perfect alignment with the bottom fairy. And once you have a good alignment, hold down one end of both fairies together and carefully lift up the top fairy to expose that tape at the wing. Then the easiest way I've found is to reach in there with an X-Acto knife and remove the lining, all while still tightly holding the 2 fairies in place. And once your lining is removed, drop that top fairy down and secure them together. And if you're gluing your fairy together, at this point you would just pick it up and apply your glue between the 2 fairies, making sure to not glue the skirt and leg area. And then just flip it over and glue the head together. But since we're using tape here, all you need to do is remove the rest of the tape liners and attach the 2 fairies. And that's it for the fairy assembly. Now let's work on that fun flower crown. Here is a crown study I made. I wanted to try some different combinations of flowers and leaves. Here you can see this one has 3 flowers, and each flower has a double layer of petals, with each layer of petals being in the same cotton candy pink color. This fairy has the same flowers, but I placed 5 here, which makes a fuller crown. Just a note here, after I glue on the flowers, I lift each petal up to give it this 3D effect. And this crown here is the 3 flowers with leaves added to it. For this one, I used 3 layers of flowers. The bottom 2 layers are magenta and the top one is the lighter cotton candy pink. Kind of neat how much that one pops out. And down here I used purple. Here's a 5-flower crown, but with a single layer of flowers. For this one I left the petals flat. Very simple, but still quite pretty. For our fairy today, I'm going to make this crown. It's a double layer of flowers in 2 pinks and with leaves added to it. And remember that you'll be creating 2 crowns, one on each side of the fairy's head, so you'll need double of the pieces that you see here. For each crown, you'll need 3 dark pink flowers, 3 light pink, and then about 9 or 10 leaves. When you go to cut these pieces, because they're so small, you want to make sure that your cutting mat is pretty sticky and is not at the end of its sticky life, because otherwise these tiny pieces may get stuck under your blade. For the crown, I like to use tacky glue because it dries pretty quickly. And just dispense a small amount of glue into a bowl. This is some old glue. And for application, I'm using a brush that's hardened by some dry glue. You can use any tiny brush, even the tip of a sharp knife will work for this. And all we're going to do is dip your brush in the glue and then just dab it onto the fairy's head like this. And I want to create a curve here, so I'm going to go ahead and place my glue for the other 2 flowers, equal distance apart. Then, with an X-Acto knife, gently pierce a flower piece to pick it up and place it on your glue. And now place another dab of glue on top of each flower. Try not to place too much here if you want to lift your petals up for that 3D effect, because you don't want the glue to spread and glue all the petals down. And here, when you go to place your second flower on top of the first, just turn it so that the petals are staggered and not directly overlapping each other. You can see here my petals are staggered, so I can see my bottom petals in between the petals for the top flower. And now I'm going to let this dry thoroughly for a good 10 minutes to be safe before the next step. This is actually a good time to work on the crown on the other side. So once your glue has dried, take your X-Acto knife and just lift up each petal one at a time like this. And repeat with the other crown, and just be careful that you're not pressing on the first crown with your fingers. So right here my flower comes off because I didn't place enough glue, or maybe I was too aggressive with my petal popping. If this happens to you, no problem, just glue it right back on. I'm not sure why I decided to place the glue on my flower here. I would recommend just placing your glue on that empty spot on the fairy's head and then place your flower back onto that same spot. And now we are ready to attach some crown leaves. For this part, I'm putting a glob of glue at the end of my paintbrush. This is to have glue that I can access easily, and you'll see why when I go to glue the leaves. So here's my glob of glue, and then with a tweezer just pick up each leaf, and notice that each leaf has a pointier end. So you want to dip the dull end into your glue. And then insert it behind your flowers. and just repeat until you have a complete crown. And of course, don't forget the other side. And that's it, our fairy assembly is complete. Now I'll show you how to display your fairy. Here I haven't put a crown on this fairy yet, so that's why you see a plain head here, but that won't affect how your fairy sits, obviously. The first thing you want to do is to reinforce the folds at the fairy's skirt. And then split the vines into two sides. And now if you place your fairy down with the legs hanging over your table, you'll see that she won't sit. She'll just fall right over like she's had too much whiskey. The real reason she won't sit for you is this vine is pushing her wing. So to fix that, bend the vine quite aggressively. Bend it so it's no longer touching the bottom of that wing. And you may need to place her down and keep bending until she sits for you. Now here, I noticed my longer vine is opening up to her right side, and for my photo purposes, I wanted to have this longer vine on her left side. So I'm just going to switch them around like this. And now I have the longer vine on the side I want it to be. So again, place her down. She falls over, so just bend that vine at the point where it's pushing on the wing. And then where the vine hangs over your table, you can curve that down. And now you also have to bend the vine on the other side, so I'm doing that here, and then she should sit for you. If her body is leaning one way or the other, you can bend that vine some more, or sometimes it's because the fold at her skirt is uneven, so just shift her body to the side you need it to go like this, and that will also help her sit up straight. And that's it, guys. I hope you have fun with this one. The crown is so fun to make, and I think it adds a sweet touch to this fairy. Thanks so much again for all your support. I really appreciate it.